Hi and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast, the summer episode being aired on the 2nd of July. And in this episode we'll talk about what if the future of architecture was actually about doing less. My guest today is Natalie Mossin, who's architect, professor and head of institute at KADK, the Royal Danish Academy here in Copenhagen. Natalie has worked extensively with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is also one of the key topics of our discussion, as well as she was one of the key figures, because the president actually, behind the UIA World Congress of Architects that happened in Copenhagen in 2023. Together, we explore how architecture can shift from doing more to doing better through reuse, restraint, but also thoughtful design. We talk about the innovation of nothing, the value of existing buildings, and what it really means to build for both people and the planet. So let's dive in. Natalie, welcome to Urbcast.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for inviting me over to the Academy here in Copenhagen, where we will discuss how the architecture and innovation and urban development intersect. But before that, I would love to ask you for your background. So how did you get the interest in, first of all, architecture, but also working in this intersection of innovation and basically academia?
I mean, now that you ask, going all the way back to finishing high school and contemplating starting at university, I think what attracted me very much to architecture is something that still attracts me to architecture, and it's the fact that it's an art form, but it's an art form that's very much in the service of people, society, and the planet. So it has all these constraints, but also all of these wonderful synergies and interactions with other fields and with society at large.
And that's very interesting because just before we started, you've actually mentioned that what is really interesting is that the academia, the environment you are creating has three legs compared to other universities and other sciences and research places. Could you tell us what did you mean by that?
At the Royal Danish Academy, which is a school for both architecture, design and conservation, both architecture and design at our institution are defined as building on three legs of knowledge: research, practice, and artistic development. I know, of course, that the fact that you define such a foundation is not, that in itself doesn't mean that it doesn't exist elsewhere where it's not defined. But we are very proud of having these three legs of knowledge and having a formal recognition of them also by the Danish state and ministry, that our educations have this third leg of knowledge, which is artistic development. I do believe that artistic development is a key part of developing knowledge, just as research and practice.
We'll dive into some examples of that, including some of the publications you've been part of. Just to have maybe one more warm-up question, which might be quite difficult to answer, because I was wondering, in your opinion, how close is the, so to say, business and the academia here in Denmark when we talk about design and architecture?
Well, it's an interesting question because you know Denmark quite well, and Denmark is a small country. So in many ways, everything is close in Denmark. It's easy to reach out to companies. It's easy to reach out to universities or to the politicians because it's a small country, but also a country with a high level of trust. And it's also very important for us and for these three legs of knowledge that we have this ability and have these partnerships, both nationally and internationally. So for research, we have excellent research, but research also depends on peers. So we need relationships and partnerships with peers and researchers at other institutions and in other countries. And with practice, to be serious about the knowledge leg of drawing knowledge from current practice, of course, we need those relationships with eminent architects, but also with other companies, other stakeholders and actors in the value chain of architecture, including the public, including individual users, politicians, and all of the commercial aspects. So we try to, both in our research and in our teaching, to foster relationships and to have that exchange and to draw knowledge, give knowledge. But at the same time, of course, we also have to value independence. So it's important for us that what we do in teaching and in research do not depend on the commercial interests, but interact with people and entities that are outside of the academy.
I was actually yesterday giving a presentation about the transformation of Copenhagen, and that was in a very beautiful city of Łódź in Poland. And after that, I had someone approach me, and he asked me about this notion of Danes being very aware of the kind of urban development and architecture and design, and he was asking me whether that would be possible to happen in other countries. Well, how do you think, if it comes to this awareness of design, urban development, transformation of cities, and the strive for sustainable living, is that a Danish thing that comes from the system, or would you think that it would be possible to recreate in other societies? And if so, could you give some recommendations on how to achieve that?
I think it's super important. I think it's something that can be worked on in every country, with differences because of different culture and situations. I think it's also something that we have to continue to work on in Denmark. It's not something that's a finished thing or a given thing. It's a continuous thing because it's culture. So for me, if I start by saying what could I dream of in Denmark, I dream of, there is a lot of interest both in primary school and in high school to engage with architecture and design, urban planning, housing, public space. It starts there. And so that interest from teachers and from students, what I would want for Denmark would be for us to support that more, to support that interest. Because also, and just sort of to dive into the primary school, also for students whose sort of strongest talents are not with academia, to discover how fantastic the crafts are. I think architecture and design as fields of knowledge could help infuse some of that pride and understanding of the value of craftsmanship, even when you teach it for primary school. So I think we have something to give. I would love to see that happen more in Denmark. Because what this points to, and that would then point out to the world, what I would love to see many places, is that we take serious a culture of architecture, a culture of urban space, a culture of ownership and agency for each person to be part of forming that architectural element of what society is and what our lives are. Because we spend so much time in buildings, but buildings also and architecture and urban space has such an impact on safety, on quality of life, on our environmental impact, but also on how we thrive and how we enjoy life and how we can meet our neighbors and all these aspects that are so important for life and for society. So I think, of course, this is a very biased viewpoint because I'm an architect, but I really think that I would love every citizen to feel that they have a say on what is architecture in their lives. And to, in that sense, also both have the interest and be empowered to say, I wouldn't want this to happen in my city, or I would love this to happen in my city. Yes, of course, we should do this here. So that those conversations could be owned by many citizens. And I think that's the strongest possible foundation you could have for great architecture. That is if you have a strong culture. And I think we've been fortunate in Denmark for many years to have a strong culture of architecture and of design and of planning. And some of that comes from that golden age of affordable, great furniture, affordable, great housing, affordable, great public spaces, libraries, public transport, all those aspects that mean so much for everyday life and for architecture.
Some say that Copenhagen could happen only in Copenhagen. It wouldn't be possible to have Copenhagen anywhere else.
Well, that I think is true because every architecture is so situated. So Copenhagen could only happen in Copenhagen, but like a golden age of a wonderful city in Poland could only happen there. What's a wonderful city that you think is developing great things in Poland currently?
I think the one I just mentioned, the city of Łódź, which went through extremely big transformation, urban revitalization, and so on.
So that could only happen there. And then how can we then support that more? Because hopefully the citizens are feeling pride and they're experiencing the difference, just like here in Copenhagen. And they're going to vote for politicians who will not pave over those green areas, who will continue to work to preserve history and create future developments that are good to people and planet. So then you have like a whole city of people who hopefully see this as something that they want, something that gives them quality of life, and something that they're going to protect. So these, and I think that kind of development is possible so many places. But of course, it's also a question of scale. It's a question of democracy. Do you even have access to insisting on a built environment, on architecture for people? And it's a question of resource as well. So I do realize that Copenhagen has a lot of privilege in these aspects. If you look into a broader global context, then there are other resources. Then you have some very strong community resources. If you look at some of the informal settlements around the world, where in a sense you have none of these resources that helped Copenhagen, then you have some other resources. You have really strong community resources. That doesn't mean that those neighborhoods shouldn't be assisted with other kinds of resource from their greater community, from their government and from friends across the globe. But more to say that I've been very inspired by Yasmin Lai of Pakistan. And she's been famously working, creating housing, beautiful housing for people with very few means in her native country. And she's also been very famous for working with a zero donation policy, because she believes that people have the capacity and the resource themselves to make beautiful things and to uplift their community without somebody else sort of owning it through donations. I know that that's a long discussion in itself, but circling back to your question and where it started from, I think there are, the answer is not the same every place in the world, but there are opportunity to work for quality of architecture to enhance people's lives many places in the world. And I think in Europe, we have so much opportunity to create quality of life and respect the planet's boundaries.
This question or this notion of Copenhagen happening only in Copenhagen was a real conversation starter. And let's continue that discussion, because one of the topics I also wanted to mention in our conversation is the UIA World Congress of Architects that you were the president of, which happened in Copenhagen in 2023. And that was largely about working with the Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe let's weave those into our conversation. And I was wondering, first of all, what are your thoughts about this Congress looking back? Now it's been exactly 2 years ago. And second of all, how do you work with the Sustainable Development Goals so that you integrate them in the projects, but for real, not only to put a stamp on the publication after?
Thank you for these great questions. They are a real conversation starter as well. Maybe starting with the goals. I think the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a very important piece of policy. They are important because they address global problems in a global way, which I think is needed. They're also outstanding because they bring together what I could maybe call the green and the red sustainability. So you have the social sustainability issues and you have the environmental sustainability issues. The UN, before the SDGs, had big important campaigns both on green issues and on social issues. But with the SDGs, those were brought together. It's one complex agenda. What is so amazing, and I think also something that connects quite intuitively with architects, is that complexity. That you can't just work on one issue. You can't work only on energy issues. You have to also work on inequality and climate action and life beneath the oceans. So bringing all these major challenges together in the SDGs could not happen today, but we have to continue to work with them and to reach for them. And I think architecture has a lot to contribute to every one of the 17 goals. I've also often had conversations with architects sort of saying, oh, why are there not this 18th or 19th goal? There likely could have been. No, now those 17s were what was put together there. I don't think it should be thought of as something that couldn't include other things, but it's a great starting point for a serious discussion about respecting human rights, respecting the planet, and how that comes together in everything we do. That work, they were adopted by the UN in 2015. They reached to 2030. I don't think we should ever tire of them, probably not after 30 either, because these challenges continue to be crucial. When we started to work with them shortly after they were decided in the UN here at the Royal Danish Academy, we committed every master student to work with them. We did not commit those master students to work with them in a specific way. We kept that open. You could work with one, you could work with all, you could work with a critique, you could work with any aspect or any sub-target, but somehow we asked people to see their work in connection with these major challenges. It was considered quite radical at the time. It is quite radical, but I really believe that it has been an engine for great teaching, great learning, and great careers for people taking that inspiration and pushing it further after leaving the academy. For myself, I wanted to help support that conversation for students when they started working with the goals, and that's where the idea of the architecture guide to the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals came up. Those guidebooks are really meant as a guide to the goals, how to understand those 17 goals if you're an architect. What I wanted was to take those global goals where you think, goal number 1, no poverty. What can I do as an architect, as an architecture student? Those goals are really big. You think not even my prime minister can do anything about that. Or maybe my prime minister can a little if my prime minister worked with other prime ministers in the UN, but that's really the level. What I wanted was to have the conversation between the goalness of the goal, that big overarching agenda, and then the practice in a specific project. Because you can do a project that contributes to how poverty is experienced. If you have safe, proper housing, then the effect of being poor is not the same on your life. So as an architect, if you contribute to quality housing, low-cost quality housing, you are helping addressing that big goal in a specific sense. So those guidebooks, they say, okay, what's the big agenda here? What is the goalness of the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? How does that relate to the built environment? And how can individual projects, small scale, big scale, everywhere in the world, how can they contribute in each their way to addressing that problem? And it was a very hopeful project to be part of, together with a great group of fellow writers and editors and researchers, because there are really great examples of realized projects all over the world that contribute to the goals. So it was a good way to have that conversation about what we can do as architects, that we have agency in our own work, wherever we are, at whatever scale, with whatever resource, but then all the time, of course, linking it to that overarching agenda, which is the health of the planet and the dignity of every person. So we created those guidebooks. It became part of our 7-year preparation of the UAE World Congress of Architects that you just mentioned, and which was held here in Copenhagen with the SDGs as a theme, how to contribute to the SDGs and how to contribute to a built environment, to an architecture that leaves no one behind. And leaving no one behind is the overarching value that the UN defined for the 17 goals. To the second part of your question, how it feels 2 years after. It was such an honor and so inspiring to see people here in Copenhagen. So people from all over the world bringing their practice, their experience, their knowledge to the table and sharing it with peers. there were so many connections between people. So that was for me very strong. And I hope that many who were part of the Congress went home with new connections or connections they already had, but that got a little stronger, or inspiration, specific inspiration on how they themselves to work in their practice. I know certainly that as a host, I got so much inspiration and I learned so much from so many other cultures. So I think for me, in my continued work with the SDGs, that's the key thing, that we need to continue working with the goals, but we need to localize the goals.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great event. There were over 6,000 participants from over 133 countries. So this is literally a global movement around sustainable architecture. And I was very curious about your reflections because sometimes, the problem is that you meet, you talk, and then everyone goes home. And another challenge of mine with the development goals are that they are quite broad, as you've mentioned. They are like the overarching themes. So like, how do I actually act? And I think that the action is where it is hard. But we are talking today here in the room full of books. And I will also add the link to the description to the books, to the guidebooks about the goals. But we're also having here the innovation of nothing, which is more about the trends in the design and urban development. And this is another thing I would like to discuss. I wonder, when we talk about the innovation of nothing, what does it mean to the future of cities? And what is this new paradigm of restraint, reuse, and reduction?
Maybe if I can link it a little bit to the outcome of the Congress, because at the conclusion of the Congress, we presented 10 principles to sort of be a bridge, in a sense, between the 17 goals and what might that mean for the built environment if we, in architecture, really want to do it. So the 10 principles would be ways of thinking in architecture, always not easy to reach, but in principle, the way to go. And one of them is about reusing the existing. Another is about biogene local materials. Another is about the reduction of waste. If I use that to link to the innovation of nothing, which is a book we created for our students and for students at engineering courses and constructing engineers, it's really about, well, there are many themes in that book, but one thing that led to the title is this idea about subtraction rather than adding. Because quite often in architecture, we solve problems by adding. You have more kids in a neighborhood, you build a new school. You need to do sports, you build a sport facility. These are wonderful things and wonderful endeavors. But there's also situations where our sort of liking of adding should maybe be challenged, where fewer square meters could do the same job, or where we don't need another layer in that facade, we could do with less. Because it's so easy to add, because when we add, people can see we are doing something, they can give us a fee if we're practicing architects. If I'm a material producer and I produce a new great component to a facade, you can see it, you can buy it. If I formulate a new service, it makes sense for you, you can buy that. How do you live out of taking stuff away? If I'm an architect, say, well, you can do with less square meters. Do I then get a smaller fee? Most likely. If I, as a material producer, take something out of the build-up of a wall, will I get less sales? Yes, most likely. We are not rewarded for taking stuff away. But right now, we also have a serious planetary crisis that is driven by overconsumption. So we want to challenge people in our own profession, architecture, but also the constructing engineers and the engineers, because these people are all working with the conception of what to do. So when we think, then what we would like is, let's spend more hours, less material. Think a bit more, use a bit less. And that's the innovation of nothing, because it's hard to take things away. It's hard to do something equally good with less. That's where we need great architects, great urban planners, and great engineers and constructing engineers, because it's a tall order to deliver to people's need and do wonderful things with less. I think it's possible. And again, there are many examples of it being possible, but it's not easy. And it might well take more hours to design and develop those solutions, and some convincing also of the people who are then the buyers of that service.
I think it echoes what was proposed by the Stop Byggebevægelsen, which is the Stop Building movement, essentially. And actually, Søren Nielsen and Nikolai Bo Andersen were guests of the podcast, where they basically said that, in a way, we should not build anymore because we have enough of buildings, especially in the global north, right? Like, this is the region that we should focus on. What do you think about this thought? Should we stop building new builds?
Just one final, maybe you can link to this project also, because what I'm showing now that you can't see on the podcast is Baumslaber Ebeli made a building for themselves, the 2226 Lusenau, and it's a great example of this subtraction, because it's a project with no artificial heating or cooling. There's a lot of the systems we put into buildings that they have done without. It's a very simple facade system and so on, but it has taken a long time to develop. Before we move to the Byggestop, it's just an example of a beautiful, high quality project that actually managed to take stuff away. Think more, use less. Then the Byggestop. I think it's a great, the provocation of saying architect, stop building, urban planner.
And it's also said by architects themselves, some of them.
Again, it's a great way to change the conversation and to make people really think, which we need to do, because we need to change how we're acting. I think for me, the key thing is that when we build, when we develop, we do it because there's a real need. And it's totally true that in Denmark, we have so many buildings, so much building stock, so much developed area, that we should very seriously think about reducing that built area rather than expanding it more. And that's what the Byggestop people are talking about. They're saying, look at what we already have. We have so much. And it's true. There could be other places in the world where you really need to build. Pointing to some of the areas in the world that have been devastated by disaster could be one example, whether it's a war or natural disaster. There are places where you need to build. It could also be something not of that scale, but still you really need it, because that would make a big difference in people's lives. Then you need to do it the right way. Then you need to use no more material than you need. Ideally, not virgin, non-reusables. All of the sort of in lessons of how we can build in a sustainable way. But there will be places where that's important for human dignity. But there are so much already there. And for us to even begin to address that seriously, I think the Byggestop movement is a way to try to push that conversation, to say, let's seriously look at all that's already there, all the materials we have already excavated, all the qualities and all the potentials already there, and use that. And again, just like with the Baumslager Ebeli project, where they make away with a number of components or systems, to use what's already there also opens the door for great architecture. It also requires a lot of thinking and a lot of quality in architecture.
That's what Søren Nielsen said, that basically the global north used up the building quota, especially in the last 2-3 decades. We've been building a lot, and now it's time to let the others build as they might need it more. To summarize our discussion, I was wondering if we could end up on a positive note, and I was wondering
yes.
if maybe you have any positive example of a project that is interesting and fascinating, and that might be this example of us overcoming some of the challenges that we have, especially around the climate and planetary boundaries.
Yes, there's so many, and that's sort of just pointing back to these guidebooks we made, and those were made in 18 and 20, so you could make another one now. The one we're doing right now is about radical localization. So we're looking at those 10 principles from the Congress and finding cases that, so this is different from the guidebooks where we're illustrating contributions to each goal. Here we're looking at projects that deliver both to the red and the green sustainability. Projects that are local, that adds value for each person and work seriously with limiting the environmental impact. But we look at it as related to specific context. What does that look like in Rwanda? What does it look like in Denmark? What does it look like in Palestine? What does it look like in Canada? Because the situation is different, and we can learn from each other, but it's not a one size fit all. So how we implement will be different, and learning about your own context, going closer to understanding what localization means where you're practicing, I think is one of the important tools and one of the important competences we need for future urbanists and architects. We should share our knowledge globally because the challenges we're facing are crossing all kinds of borders, but we should also be very serious about the specific people, the specific place and culture and climate that we are part of. And I think for me, that's sort of, as you were saying, closing this conversation, looking to the horizon, I think working with the goals, but working with the goals in a way that engages deeply with the local. I think there's a lot of hope in that. In Denmark, it might well mean being inspired by some of the many great architects like Søren Pielmann, who are driving a new aesthetics from the existing, from reuse. Other places, it might be something else. That might be specifically important here in that context. Somewhere else, it might have a different appearance, different materials, but a similar dual impact for people and planet.
So one recommendation, I always ask my guests to recommend a book, and we have a lot of books here. We have the room full of books, and we've been talking about some of the guides and the innovation of nothing. So please, one book to inspire the listeners.
That's a difficult one, of course. I think I would like to recommend a book that's not an architecture book. It's The Message, it's right behind you there. It's a book by an American journalist. And now I hope I'm pronouncing Ta-Nehisi Coates correctly. But it's a book I read recently, and I think it's a great, strong personal voice. It's inspiring. The way it links to this message of localization is that it has a strong voice, just like architects each need a strong local voice. It's a voice that's grounded in specific conditions, a specific person, a specific culture, a specific viewpoint, and then expand that to be relevant for other people, other places. And I think that, for me, I could feel the inspiration into architecture as well. The strong anchor in local culture, in local identity, but with a generosity and an interest in learning from the rest of the world.
Fabulous. I mean, we have a couple of recommendations with the one special at the end. I'm very thankful for that, because obviously, like, this podcast is a snapshot of this broad topic of architecture meeting innovation and urban development and working with the sustainable goals. My goal was to present it to the listeners and also to show your work. So thank you for participating and for discussing this interesting topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the newest episode with Natalie. And as always, you can find more information on the topic summarized in the article that is being published on the website urbcast.pl, as well as on the LinkedIn profile of Urbcast. So feel free to check it there, share the episode with someone that also can find it interesting. And let me know if you have any other ideas for collaboration or podcast episode. Take care.